be full screen you guys now.
Cool. Okay. So we're welcomed here today by James Daniel, Director of Precision Grazing. He's going to go through some grazing management tips to extend the grazing period by 2 weeks. So over to you, James.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Charlie. And yeah, thanks for inviting me to chat with you guys this evening. Yeah, just wanted to run through some tips. Yeah, August is a great time. We're currently having some pretty awesome weather, and hopefully everyone's enjoying a bit of downtime. And then maybe just paying a little bit of attention now to planning how they're going to sort of set the farm up to have a really successful autumn, because we know a successful autumn will lead to a successful spring. So I'm going to share some sort of tips and a bit of guidance as to how we can do that. Because every day spent out at grass and grazing is a clear driver of profit in a livestock system. So I guess a bit about myself. Yeah, Director of Precision Grazing. Precision Grazing is a farm consultancy business. We work with beef, sheep, and dairy farmers across England and Wales to help them adopt sort of real pasture-based systems. Reason we're so interested in pasture or grazed grass is it's the lowest cost of feed. It's a very sustainable, maybe even regenerative source of nutrition. And if we can optimize our farms to make best use of that, then that should lead to hopefully a nice lifestyle and a healthy profit at the end of the year. So in our discussion this evening, we're going to talk about autumn grazing management, and that's how to build pasture covers, what we should be doing if we've got sheep, beef or dairy stock, talking through the store or finish decision with our lambs and any of our growing or even breeding animals that we might have a surplus, and then also chatting through a discussion around winter feed supplies and where we might be on the farm. Does that sound all right, Charlie?
Yeah, sounds good. Really good.
Okay, awesome. So if you have a think about where we are at the moment and how we've got here, end of July, sort of early to mid of August, reasonably dry period, and we saw grass growth rates drop away a bit. On sheep and beef farms, the average was around 30, and that's a little bit less than the animal demand. And on dairy farms, the average has been around 40 kilos of dry matter per hectare per day, and the demand's been up at around 50 to 60. So because the grass has been growing less than the farm demand is, that means the amount of grass on farm has dropped. We refer to the amount of grass on farm as average farm cover. Average farm cover is important because to grow grass, we need to intercept sunlight, and it's the leaf area we have on farm which does that for us. And the leaf area is represented by average farm cover, and we express that in kilos of dry matter per hectare, just like we express grass growth and animal demand on farming kilos of dry matter per hectare. So early in August, growth was quite slow, below demand, farm cover dropped. Now conditions have changed. Most parts of the country have had plenty of rain, an annoying amount of fuel if you've been trying to combine in the last 2 or 3 weeks. But that plus temperature has meant that growth rates have turned a corner, and they're probably now double where they were 2 weeks ago. So dairy farms are up at 60 plus, heading towards 80, and beef and sheep farms are sort of 40, 50s. So that's above demand, and that's sort of really useful position to be at this time of year if we can sort of capture and make use of that. So the forecast going forwards from where we are today on the 4th of August is for growth rates, high growth rates to be maintained across all farm types. If the farm's dropped its farm cover quite low, then that might mean that the rise could be a little bit slower. So I'll just pause there a minute. Yeah, so we've got someone coming to join us in the meeting. So tell you what, Charlie, just do you access to mute participants that have joined, and then yeah, we'll carry on the chat. Yeah, awesome, thank you. Yeah, even in Monif, yeah, correct names up. Yeah, thanks for joining us. If you've got a question or anything, just chuck perhaps a message in the chat or raise your hand if you can find that option. And yeah, we'll stop and probably unmute you so you can yeah, come and ask it. So yeah, I haven't missed much. I'm just chatting through some sort of where we are now in the season. Cool. So extending the grazing season. Every extra day of grass has a real impact on farm profit, and that's mainly through cost reduction. So if animals are outside of grass, we're using less fuel and machinery, less labour, less bedding. So in every pound saved is a pound that heads towards profit. If we get extra days grazing in the autumn, so we get these extra maybe 2 weeks by building our farm cover. So that's increasing the average amount of grass on farm. We'll talk through the methods in which we do that in a minute. We get extra days grazing in the spring by or through our correct autumn management. And some of that's really lined up with when we stop grazing, or recognising when it's appropriate to stop grazing on farm in the autumn to leave some grass ready for the spring. To be successful in the autumn and the spring, measurement and management are key. So knowing what the farm demand is in kilos of dry matter per hectare, so the demand is what the animals need to eat, and also knowing what the farm supply is. The farm supply is the pasture growth rate. So our aim in the autumn is to increase the average farm cover, and that will provide a buffer into the autumn. We do that by ensuring our farm demand is less than our supply during September. So the demand of our animals needs to be below or less than our pasture growth rates. If it is, we have a surplus of feed, and that surplus of feed means the average amount of grass on farm will lift during September, and then that will be our buffer as we head into October, November, when grass growth rates slow down. And across all farms, we need to remember to stop grazing in the autumn or in the winter if we get that far, when the average farm cover reaches a target. And a very sort of generic target across all system types would be 2,000 kilos dry matter per hectare. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Charlie, but that's something that Rumi could show you, or will show you, is the average farm cover across the farmlet or across the farm.
That's correct. Yeah, the software will show the average farm cover. So yeah, it will help in meeting that 2,000 figure you've just spoken about. Okay.
And it's also going to calculate the animal demand for whatever groups are on farm.
Yeah, also calculates the demand and supply, and brings up a grass wedge to help match them up and get a better understanding.
Yeah, okay, so it'd be really useful to use that next week or the next week or so to understand what the farm demand is, what the current farm position is in terms of grass on farm, and then look at matching those up. So think about building this wedge, about increasing the amount of grass on farm, and we do it through 2 ways. First one is to increase the supply, so the amount of grass available. Some of that sort of natural things that may be happening already, like bringing in silage ground into the grazing area, bringing in any reseeded fields again into the grazing area. Minimizing the number of livestock groups is a really effective one. If you've got 10 fields and 10 groups, then all of the farm is being grazed all of the time, and your plants can't get a rest. And what we know about grazing management is that plants need to be grazed quickly and then left to recover. So in this position, if that farm could take those 10 groups and make them into, let's say, 2 groups, then each group would have 5 fields, and they'd only be grazing a 20th. So they'd be grazing a 5th or 20% of the farm at any one time. So 80% would be rested and recovering. Now, condensing that many groups may not be possible. So instead, we might be looking to split some of those fields. So there's various ways to get into it, but minimizing the number of groups of livestock. So thinking about how can we consolidate is really useful, really good tip. Look at soil fertility piece. So it's a good time to get lime on. If all the silage cuts are finished and there's a gap in grazing, may consider nitrogen fertilizer, which I'll touch on a little bit later on, and measuring the pastures, you know where the grass is on the farm and can direct stock in the right direction. On the other hand, to reduce demand, then there's an option to sow any coal animals, so that might be ewes that aren't in good condition. It might be any barren cows. So selling animals obviously would drop the farm demand. We may also choose to sow surplus breeding stock. And as we move on to the next section, we'll talk through the sort of sell to store or sell finish decision. So selling stock's another way to reduce demand on farm. Another option is to feed a supplement. So there might be a concentrate or a silage that displaces grass and therefore reduces the animal's demand. And finally, if you're a suckler herd, you could wean. A dairy herd, perhaps spring calving, could dry off some cows to further reduce demand. So a few options available depending on system type. Other kind of broad tips is we should be looking at rotation length of around 30 days, or certainly moving towards a rotation length of 30 days. Maintaining or wanting to see an average farm cover above 2,200 kilos. And obviously, people, those of you listening to this will have different contexts and different positions. So a scenario might be you've got a farm cover that's above 2,200 kilos, but you're a bit short of winter feed and you're thinking, well, does this mean I can't do another cut of silage? And the answer is, well, you maybe can if your farm cover's sort of above target, but make sure you look at reducing demand on farm as well. So you've got the space available to take that cut of silage and maybe get the bales you need for the winter. Because the amount of grass on farm is going to increase as we build cover, we can be quite careful that we match the appropriate stock to the right field with the right sort of quality and the right quantity. So if we've got lambs, weaned lambs on the farm, then they want to be going to short, dense, leafy pasture. Whereas if we've got some fields which are holding quite a lot of grass now or start to build grass in, we may be better to reserve those for dry use, particularly if they haven't been grazed well in the season and there's signs of seed head or sort of dead pasture at the base of that sward. So just be aware of what's in the field. It's a really good time to drive around the farm, as well as measuring the pasture. Start to get a list together of which fields you want to graze for different events. So maybe thinking about which fields you want to graze during tupping and making sure there's grass in those, particularly if you're early lambing. So the rams or tups will be going in with those ewes maybe in the next 2 or 3 weeks. Where is that going to happen and how? And then also the final piece, and this is thinking 6 months in advance now, is 6 or 7 months, is if you want to try something like on-off grazing. So maybe you're a beef farmer and you want to get animals out earlier and you've got some buildings you've got some buildings on the farm and you've got some fields next to those buildings, then maybe it's time to start thinking about leaving grass in those fields ready for spring 2022. So you've got grass close to the buildings, so you can turn animals out in March, graze them for 3 or 4 hours, bring them in, do that for 2 or 3 weeks. And that's a really useful way of extending the season as well as transitioning those cattle to grass. That's a much kinder way of transitioning and ensures sort of growth rates are protected. So just a little chat about nitrogen. It would be appropriate to use some nitrogen if you're able to, i.e. not organic, and if you have checked the status of the MVZ if you're in one. So if you're in an MVZ, just make sure you're compliant with that legislation, as well as any additional sort of NMAXs that you might be working to on the farm. If you check that, then nitrogen could be used to correct a deficit in high quality feed. So the reason I say deficit in high quality feed is because the current cost or price of nitrogen means it's quite an expensive supplement to use, A, if we don't need it, and B, if we could actually replace that deficit with something like baled silage or hay. So and the maximum rate we're looking to use would be no more than 30 kilos, and that would really be targeted at the most productive fields in the farm. So that would be fields with a pH above 6, fairly new pastures, particularly pastures which are mainly ryegrass or less than 10% clover. Because if they are mainly ryegrass or less than 10% clover, they probably aren't getting their nitrogen from any other sort of organic source, and therefore more reliant on artificial inputs. So whether you should use it or not, if there's a deficit of high quality feed, then yeah, it will give an economic return on its investment when it's used on the most productive fields in the farm. So yeah, use it with caution to make sure it earns you some money and isn't just another cost. So thinking about sheep then, where we should be now at this time of year with our mature ewes is they should all be in a body condition score, or should all have a body condition score above 3. If they haven't, now is the time to put condition on whilst pasture growth rates are high. So there's a surplus of feed on farm. If the ewes are not in good condition, now's the time to put weight on. One body condition score is 10% of the ewe's weight. So if the ewe is 70 kilos, she needs to gain 7 kilos. Let's say she does that growing at 100 grams a day, 0.1 kilos. It will then take us 70 days to gain that condition score. So if we've got a ewe at 2.5, we'd like her to be at 3.5. It may take us 70 days to get her there. 70 days is roughly 2 months. It's nearly September, 1st of September, but all of September, all of October, 1st of November. So that's nearly on for an April lambing date. So although it seems a long way away, now's the time to get this right, particularly as there's a surplus of pasture on the farm. If a ewe's not put any condition on since weaning, probably a good reason to cull her. There may be something wrong, and obviously a good time to check mows and others cull ewes is fetching good money, so it's a very useful time to move stock off the farm. It's also a good time to select your ewe lambs if you haven't done it already. So this is maybe ewe lambs you intend to breed from yourself, whether it's this year, whether it's next year, or maybe ewe lambs you intend to sell for breeding. They should be 60% of their mature weight at mating. So again, if your ewes are 70 kilos, that means the ewe lambs need to be 42 kilos at mating. Again, if they're going to grow at 100 grams a day and you intend to mate the ewe lambs on the 1st of November, they would need to be 35 kilos on the 1st of September. So 70 days, 100 grams a day, 7 kilos of weight gain to get to 42. So you can sort of see how, although it seems like autumn is a long way away, now's the time to take action to ensure you're successful. Moving on to rams or tups, good time to get those MOT'd. So check their condition, check the teeth, check the feet, get the vet to do fertility tests, and also think about any purchases you may need to make for the season. And also perhaps it's a nice time to be reflective. So how did lambing go this year? Are you topping at the right time to be lambing with the grass? If you desire to be a sort of a low input, high output system, then lambing with the grass is really important. Really challenging this spring because of that dry spell in April. So don't make any rash decisions, but if you're consistently getting short of grass after lambing, maybe decision to lamb a bit later. Heavy lambs at weaning come from lambing with grass with ewes in good condition, not from lambing early. The final piece then is around the lambs that might still be on farm or are probably still on farm. And the thought there is to have a look at their gain. So how much weight are they gaining? How many lambs are on farm? Is this more or less than normal? And what are we going to do with the lambs that are left? Are we finishing them or are we going to sell them as store? This year, the market for both is pretty good. So it's probably gives people more flexibility than maybe they've had previously. If you know what the price or schedule is going to do, they might make decisions easier. And if you don't know what the price is going to do, then you're going to make a sort of educated guess. As a guide, a lamb gaining 200 grams a day, and that would be a really good growth rate for a lamb at this time of year, for a weaned lamb. A lamb gaining 200 grams a day is 1.4 kilos of live weight a week. And that's worth, if the lamb price is £5.50 a kilo dead weight, before deductions, that's worth £3.47. That's what that lamb's earning you a week. However, if the price falls by 20 pence a kilo in that week, then that's a loss of £4 on a 20 kilo carcass. So the lambs, in essence, have got to be growing really, really well to offset any falls in the price. And that's probably why the sort of decision to sell lambs lighter or whether to sell to store may be attractive, particularly if you've got more lambs on farm now than you would do normally. Because this is all about having a successful autumn for a successful spring next year. So moving on to cows and calves. Suckler cows, body condition should be 4 and heading upwards. If that's your cow type, that'll be certainly true for native breeds. If it's a continental, it might be hanging around the 3.5. Again, put on the condition whilst the pasture growth rates are high, so whilst there's a surplus of feed on farm, put condition on the cows if you've got the opportunity to use that over the winter. A condition score on a cow is worth in the region, I think, of about half a ton of feed. If you can utilise that condition score, if the cow can drop a condition score over winter, it saves about half a ton of feed or around two round bales. So that's quite valuable. It's it's worth 40 to 50 quid. If you haven't removed the balls, think about doing so. So you sort of tighten up that calving pattern, if that's the option. And then it comes a little bit tricky because the calves are starting to eat more pasture. The cows maybe are fat already, so they need less grass. And you're trying a bit of a balancing act between looking after the calf and making sure that grows well, and not letting the cow have too much to kind of keep a check of the farm demand. So just look at how tight you're making the cows and calves graze, and consider what you want to do. Are you feeding the calf and getting that to grow well, or are you maintaining the cow? It's a bit of a decision to make there. Again, minimize the number of groups. So if you're taking the bulls out, can you put some cows and calves back together again, and rest more parts of the farm, get more of the farm rested so that pasture's recovery. With growing cattle, so that might be yearling heifers or yearling steers, so last year's calves, anything that's been weaned and is now growing by itself, have a good look at the pasture quality and quantity. Be really useful to set up a rotation in something like Rumi, so you can see what their demand is, what the pasture supply is, how many days of grazing are ahead of them, what the cover heights are, and are they appropriate for the stock. These growing cattle should be going into sort of beer can height grass and coming out somewhere between a golf ball and a tennis ball, assuming it's ryegrass and clover pasture that you're grazing. Look at the dung consistency, really good one just to see how well balanced the ration is, and if the grass dry matter probably going to be quite high for the next couple of weeks, so they should be in a good place. If it gets lower, maybe some fibre, some forage might be needed. And again, similar exercise to the lambs. If you've got animals to sell and you're able to do so, then look at their live weight gain and think about numbers on farm. And again, this is in context of how much grass do you have, how much winter feed do you have, do you need to get rid of cattle now to make sure you're successful for the winter and successful in the spring of next year. Protect your breeding stock and make use of any saleable animals on farm if that's appropriate. Again, an animal that's gaining 1 kilo a day of live weight, that's 7 kilos a week, that's worth about £14 a week, which is pretty decent. If the price falls by 10 pence a kilo and that animal is pretty heavy, so it's 320, it might produce a 320 kilo carcass, that's a loss of £32. So again, if you've got animals that are in spec and they're finishing animals, and you think the beef price might adjust itself and fall slightly, it's a good time to get those offloaded now and be able to build grass to graze longer in the autumn, again, to be more profitable. Moving on to dairy then, and because we're seeing dairy farms hit really high levels of pasture growth rates, it's really a bit of an autumn surplus or autumn surge, then it's important to be measuring the average farm cover and the growth rate really regularly to be really on top of the position of what's happening on farm. It's also good to check that the farm demand is less than supply. So you need to know what the farm demand is per hectare. How many kilos of dry matter does the farm need to grow per hectare to be successful? So that comes through grazing, being able to graze a silage area by getting rid of any cows that are on the farm. This may even be barren heifers if they've been pregnancy tested. It might be through increasing concentrate or introducing a buffer feed like silage. We want to build cover on farm. So any farm where the cover is below, this is dairy farms, the target average farm cover on the 1st of September for a dairy farm stocked at 3 cows a hectare on the grazing platform is 2,400 kilos. And I think, Charlie, there's a table that I've shared with you that you will make available in the links at the bottom of this email that you're going to send out.
Yeah, that'll be correct. Yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah. So there's some, but again, it's sort of anecdotal, but it's some really useful hints in this table. If you're a dairy farm, it's a good one to have a look at, and maybe using something like Rumi could sort of see where you were against the plan for that farm. What the dairy farm is looking to do is to build cover through September to the 1st of October, and then for that cover to drop again until the cows are housed. And that's going to depend on how wet or dry the farm is and things like stocking rates. But this is a good month to look at things like infrastructure, tracks, gates. Have you got good access, particularly on a wet farm? Have you got good access, good infrastructure to be able to get out and graze. There's no point building grass on the farm through September if you can't use it in the back end if it becomes wet. So have a look at infrastructure, and if you need extra gates, obviously hopefully there's a bit of downtime, good time to get those put in. So another sort of task or job to do at this time of year is just have a look at the winter feed budget. So very simply, this is thinking about where do I want to be on the 1st of March or 1st of April? How much grass is on farm now? How many animals do I have? So that sort of piece we've been discussing about, do I sell lambs now? Do I take them through the finish? What's the sort of level of pasture on farm at the moment? And also having a good look at the winter forage stocks. So if you know that, well, we normally fill that clamp plus half of the other side's clamp, well, have you done that? Or have you got, are you short of feed compared to what you normally have? How many bales do you normally make? And how many have you made to date? If you've sown any winter forage crops, so things like brassicas, like forage rape or stubble turnips, have they germinated? If it's fodder beet, if it's been kale that's been sown earlier, how are those crops looking? Of the 10 hectare fields you sowed, has all of it come up? Or is only half of it germinated and you've got... So good chance to have a look around the farm. Yeah, it might be a walk, it might be a drive, and just check with yourself that you're in the sort of position you expect to be at this time of year. If you're not, that's not a problem, because there's lots of options available now, which we've sort of discussed already about reducing farm demand to increase that, that supply of grass that might help you get later into the season before you need to start those winter feed stocks. So when we think about winter, we know most farms will need to allow somewhere between 100 to 150 days of rest for their grass fields. So for instance, a field grazed on the 1st of October, which isn't too far away, shouldn't really be grazed again till the 1st of March. And that would provide 150 days of rest. And that's pretty true if you're a farm with a lot of permanent pasture and maybe sort of at 600 foot plus altitude, then that would be true. If you're lower down, then maybe a field grazed on the 1st of November shouldn't be grazed the 1st of March. That's 120 days of rest. But those are the decisions we're making now. So minimizing the number of groups on the farm helps us do that, because if we can start to create these rotations where one group's got access to 4 or 5 fields, then once they graze that field, let's say in October or November, they shouldn't come back to it before spring. If we can achieve that, you'll have a very successful spring in 2022. So with any of these brassica crops or forage crops, then it may be appropriate in September to go and collect a sample from those fields. So that looks like walking through the field and cutting around, well, probably at least 5 1 metre by 1 metre sample sites, and you would cut those to grazing height, collect all the material in a bag, weigh the bag, and then there's a fairly simple calculation you can do to work out the yield of that crop. And now you might compare that to the yield you're expecting, to a sort of a textbook value, or you can take that further and work out how many days of feed are in that field and use that as a check. Again, there's a useful table to share and a bit of an easy calculation. So again, I think Charlie, you'll share that in the email that goes on.
Yeah, that'll be shared.
Okay. And the final piece is, if you're building grass on farm, then there's definitely an option, if you've got a good surplus appearing, of doing something called deferred grazing. So that would be to objectively identify a field, and ideally it should be a field with a dense pasture. So we're talking about a well-established new lay, or ideally maybe a permanent pasture on a dry field, and to let the grass there really build up and get quite tall as it can be at this time of year. It's not going to go to seed because that period has passed and it's probably already become reproductive. So it's always going to grow as growing leaf. And that feed would be really suitable for suckler cows and their calves prior to weaning, for weaned cows, whether that's dairy or beef, or even growing cattle. The piece to be aware of is that the sort of energy will be a bit lower and the protein will be a bit lower. So don't expect great growth rates if you're going to put cattle on it. You could also use that for dry use, but it's not really useful for topping because the energy value might be too low. You could use it in topping by grazing it lightly once, and then coming back kind of 40 to 50 days after the rounds went in to graze properly. But it becomes like a low-cost source of feed on the farm. To use it, it's really going to be allocated using electric fence and sort of strip grazing or paddock or block grazing the animals through it to make best use of it and to avoid any ground damage if it comes in wet. But the cost of that grass in the field is going to be around 6p, whereas if we baled that field as silage or hay, then fed it back to the animals, we'd have doubled the cost for no real change in energy or protein value. And obviously, to feed it just requires moving electric fence, no machinery required. So, yeah, really useful to sort of proactive way of saving surplus grass and then making sure we've got the right stock class to use it with. Yeah, so that's a run through of tips I think is sort of appropriate or useful to share at this time of the year. I guess a summary would be is get out and have a look around the farm, measure the average farm cover, and then there's a decision piece to make around what do you do with some of the stock on the farm. So we want to see the average farm cover ideally increase during September, and that will become the buffer for October and November. Different methods to get there. Some of it's around reducing demand, some of it's around building supply. Check the body condition of the breeding stock. And that's probably one of the first things to do, because that's going to set what sort of decisions you need to make. They're definitely the priority heading into the next couple of months. There's breeding stock in good condition. We'll get in lamb or in calf, and they're also lamb or calf in good condition, and that will ensure next season is successful. So a lot of focus is around that. As I say, measure the farm cover. Rumi could be a really useful tool to work out what the farm demand is, what position the farm's in, and then make a plan as to how to improve on that, as well as going out and checking those winter forage stocks and just having a bit of time and space to think, are we where we need to be? There's lots of options available if you're not. Cool, right, back to you, Charlie, unless you've got any questions.
No, I think we're all good. Yeah, just a quick thank you very much, James, for presenting tonight. Some very valuable and useful information that farmers, can use to help plan to extend their grazing period and into next year. And it's important, to get on top of that now. Can stay ahead of the game, so to speak. And here at Rumi, we hope farmers can start using our product. We have a 2-month free trial. So just head to our website, www.rumi.io, follow the link to sign up, and then, get going, signing up and mapping out fields and just try it out. So, yeah, thank you very much.